Emotional intelligence, meaning that you're not just here for transaction, and that's in
Yeah.
and out of business. You're not just in a relationship for transaction. You're there to connect with another person as a
Mhm.
human being. You're there to understand that other person as a human being, and you're there to relate to this other person as a human being. So
Mhm.
emotional intelligence is absolutely key. Again, just a fair warning to those out there that want to involve themselves in a professional setting, that social media is there as a tool,
Mhm.
and it can be used against you if you've not necessarily cleaned up that image before going into the professional realm. And some people attempt to, you know, misspell their names or have some funny spelling about it. Well, the reality of it is, if a person wants to find out some things about you,
Yeah.
they're going to find out those things about you,
Yes.
right?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Your Lab Central. Today, I'm joined with Paul. So, Paul, would you like to tell our audience why they should be excited about our conversation?
Well, first and foremost, Aditya, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm amazingly excited to connect with you and then also to just share value and be a good resource and reference for the listeners. Why they should be excited: for those that are here locally inside of the United States. Again, I'm just saying that for my geographic reference. For those locally here inside the United States, if we just so happen to touch on any business owners or people that are employers, I'm actually a specialist in a field that has come under a lot of scrutiny recently, and that's the employer healthcare space. There's a
Mhm.
lot of issues going on when it comes to employer healthcare, and I've written two bestsellers. The third, it's on its way to bestseller status. So easily able to find me on Amazon, Paul H. Flowers Jr.,
Mhm.
where they can dive more into it. Outside of that, globally, I'm working on a project for the masses. Basically, there are 12 skills that I realized are available to every single person.
Mhm.
And with that, it makes a difference when people know those skills, can actually utilize those skills, and have them as a part of their being so that they can get paid forever, regardless of what tariffs or how the economy goes. So, those are some things that I'm amazingly excited to share with the listeners and looking forward to our conversation.
So, let's touch upon both of these things in brief, right? Just to get started. Can you tell me what exactly are the issues that are present in employer healthcare? I guess it's something that's a problem everywhere because it concerns companies and employers in general. So, it
Mhm.
should be something that everybody is concerned about, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if we have enough time to go through all of the problems with employer
Yeah.
healthcare in the States. The shortened version of it, Aditya, is that the employers aren't necessarily aware of all of the options available. In
Mhm.
fact, I just got a text message today where a company that's located here in Indiana is running at $1 million higher than they were last year. And what that means is that typically over a 5 month period of time, your company is used to a certain amount of claims, meaning a certain amount of people using the health insurance,
Right.
a certain amount of people getting prescriptions filled, et cetera.
Yeah.
Well, when in contrast to last year, you're at $1 million higher this year, that's a big red flag that says
Right.
something's going on, something's not right. And as I spoke to my partner who had actually referred that company over to me, she'd share with me that, to her knowledge, the broker or the advisor that's working with that particular account has had no communication about it. And when
Mhm.
she sent me a snapshot of the figures, January alone, they were operating at over 50% higher than they normally would, closer to 60% higher than they
Mhm.
normally would. And that to me is a big red flag that says that some type of intervention should be taking place. So without employers understanding that transparency is
Mhm.
key, meaning they should know exactly what's going on. Not that they should know who, like employee number 652 is having a colonoscopy or whatever like that, because
Yeah.
HIPAA is a big important thing here in terms of privacy. But they should know, and that something is going on inside of their plan. And if someone's not actively monitoring that,
Yeah.
then the problem just kind of balloons into something that I saw 3 months down the line. I think it was March or April, they were at almost 300% of where they were the previous year.
Yeah.
So things like that impact a bottom line, the company's bottom line. It
Mhm.
makes it harder to put bonuses in place. It makes it harder to actually put certain projects and business objectives and start those processes into
Right.
going forward. And without, again, that oversight, again, it balloons into something that is it can almost get uncontrollable.
Right.
So education is where I think a lot of employers are missing the cue. And it's not that the employers are at fault, it's that the brokers and the advisors that
Mhm.
work for these big national, international conglomerates,
Yeah.
they're not paid to provide solutions to all the problems. They're paid in order to keep the number of employees on the books. So they have misaligned incentives where if they're with a particular plan, they'll stay with that plan
Yeah.
because, well, it gives them back end bonuses, right, over
Mhm.
here, kind of in that gray area.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that my goal is to actually alleviate, which is that back end bonus structure that, keep shaking my hand over here and I'll keep feeding you business over here type of thing. I don't like it. I don't do business like that. And it doesn't necessarily work when it comes to the people that get impacted, which are the employees at these companies.
Yeah. Now, right at the top, off the top of my head, I don't know, is probably governance an issue because you talked about transparency in the whole system, right? I don't want to dive a lot into this because obviously this is an hour-long, multi-hour-long discussion. But where do we get started if somebody has to look at it from a 20,000 feet view level? Now, where do they start looking into it? Governance or something else that they should be diving in?
Well, a shameless plug, Superior Insurance Advisors, and again, reaching out to myself and my team with Next Gen Benefits as well as Health Rosetta is a great starting place. The biggest thing that they can do is to make sure that they are evaluating what's called self-funding as an
Uh,
option to their current strategy. So
okay.
typically you'll have an employer that has a what's called a BUCA plan. BUCA is an acronym that we use. And for the listeners out there, that stands for Blue Cross, United, Cigna, and Aetna. When
Uh,
you have one of those insurers as your primary insurer, which people know them because they spend billions of dollars in marketing, but what
mhm.
they don't know is that a lot of the dollars that go into those plans don't end up coming out in actual patient care.
Okay.
So their concern, meaning the Buka companies, their concern isn't necessarily the quality of care,
Yeah.
it's their financial shareholders.
Mm.
As each one of those companies are publicly held companies, that
Mhm.
makes it so that their incentive isn't to
Good.
lower the cost as much as possible. It's
Yeah.
to the shareholders and
Yeah.
make sure that their dividends are increasing and ballooning year
True.
after year, right?
Yeah.
So when you have a system that's set up like that, that's number one. If an employer's on one of those policies, big red flag if their broker and advisor has been keeping them on one of those policies. And side note, it doesn't matter if you switch from Blue Cross to United or United to Cigna or Aetna to Blue Cross. It doesn't matter if you're switching and playing that same game if you're just staying on that rodeo, right?
Okay.
It's almost like a merry-go-round, if you will, of poor
Mhm.
choices. So there is the first place that a employer would want to look, as if they're involved in a Blue Cross, United, Cigna, or Aetna plan, then they quite frankly, and I'm just going to be real straightforward about it, they need to fire their advisor, especially if they're over 50 or 100 employees. They need to fire their advisor because they're typically having an advisor in place that's receiving bonuses that aren't disclosed
Mhm.
based on the compensation disclosure form, which they're supposed to
Mhm.
share all compensation they're receiving due to the Consolidated Appropriations Act from a few years ago. But realistically, they'll disclose the baseline commission, but
Yeah.
they won't disclose the additional bonuses. And it's about four or five of them. I'm in a mobile office right now. I'm actually reaching out. I'm sitting at a client's office to take this call, but I would normally pull up the actual sheets that I have that show what these bonuses are, right? It's plain English, it's black and white, but Blue Cross doesn't disclose it to the employer, nor does the broker disclose it to the employer because quite frankly, they can put a lot of legal jargon in there inside the contract that says that they don't have to, or if they want this additional information,
Yeah.
write to us and we'll provide it for you. But they'll just show you that baseline piece. So, uh, to answer the question again, the governance piece, it's a matter of understanding the industry,
Okay.
understanding the games that are being played. And I do talk about this a lot in the first bestseller that I had. It's on Amazon. It's called The Hidden Healthcare Goldmine.
Okay.
If we can have a link to that somewhere at some point. And again, I'm not about royalties off of books. I want the employer to be informed and well educated so that they can ask the right questions and become an empowered consumer of healthcare services here in the States.
Thanks for sharing that information. I mean, I am sure a lot of employers will value that and have a look at how they've been having their employees insured, right? So thanks for sharing that. Now,
Absolutely.
the next part that you mentioned about the skills that people should be having and how they can generate income for themselves. Now, you talked about 12 things. Okay, I don't know if you can cover all 12 of them probably. So, if you can just tell maybe two of them and let's see where this
Sure.
goes. Yeah.
Absolutely. The top two that I think are huge are emotional intelligence
Uh,
and negotiation, right?
Okay.
Emotional intelligence meaning that you're not just here for transaction, and that's in
Yeah.
and out of business. You're not just in a relationship for transaction. You're there to connect with another person as a
Mhm.
human being. You're there to understand that other person as a human being, and you're there to relate to this other person as a human being. So
Mhm.
emotional intelligence is absolutely key. And I'll switch gears to negotiation. With negotiation, and I say this in a very delicate way because people get turned off when they hear the S word, but everything is sales. Everything.
All right. Yeah.
A parent is selling their children on going to bed at a certain time. A teacher is selling their students on the importance of the lesson. A
Yeah.
boss is selling their employee on the importance of working for them and why they should stay with them in
Mhm.
today's economic and job market. So negotiation is huge, in so much that each person should be bringing a certain degree of value to the table. And more importantly, they should be able to articulate that value and see if it resonates with their own internal value system, right?
Mhm.
Because if I'm in a position where, and this was a position that I was in from a negotiation standpoint, where I'd worked corporately, this is going on about 8 years ago. I
Yeah.
was working corporately at a company prior to starting Superior Insurance Advisors, and I'd share it with them that, I have a tremendous amount of value. And I'm not just saying that because I wanted to pat myself on the
Yeah.
back. I showed it. I was the number one agent coming in with little to no experience that particular year. I ballooned past every single person on the sales floor. I had the highest conversion the company's ever seen, and I
Yeah.
did it all legally, morally, and ethically. Right, legally, morally, and ethically. And I bring those things up that I'll circle back around to in just a sec. So I promoted myself essentially to management by delegation of the teams, I should say, who actually asked that I be a person that would help to manage them, because I would help train people in their position,
Hey.
help them overcome objections, and help them be better human beings first and foremost. So as the manager, I took the smallest and lowest converting team to the highest converting team inside of 60 days. Not an
Great.
easy task, but when
Yeah.
you have skills that are for people, right, not for profit, right? People over profit every time. When you have skill sets that are for people, it actually shines through in your communication and how you
Correct.
operate with them in a work setting.
Mhm.
So fast forward, my team's at the top. Then they asked me to basically be the trainer for the entire company about 12 or 13 months later. And I said yes. And doing that, I also provided the value that I know
Yeah.
that that particular position entails, right? Demanding the compensation that's commensurate with the experience and, more importantly, the results.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
for keynote, right, asterisk here, they fired the entire training team. It was three people on that training team. One
Okay.
was making over six figures, and the other two close to it. So they clearly had the space in the budget to ask you to increase my salary to a nominal, still less than six figures, but a nominal, like at the time, I think it was like 95, 96 grand, which is on par with other sales trainers and other directors of sales training, because again, I was running the entire show for the campaign, for the entire
Correct.
campaign. Well, they didn't see that value. So, okay, I took that one on the proverbial chin. Well, when they would ask me to then train every person coming in, not just single-handedly, which I did flawlessly, but also where I would have to train them to sell the products that were profit driven over the people. I said, wait a second, you guys got those messed up. I go people
Yeah.
over profit. They wanted me to train people to sell the profitable
Beautiful.
product that
Yeah.
wasn't the best for the people.
Mhm.
And long story short, Aditya said, I don't do business like that. I trained for the open enrollment period.
Mhm.
And November 1st, 2017, I left that company and started Superior Insurance Advisors. So I bring that up to say that yes, what they were doing was legal, but it wasn't moral and ethical. And even though I presented a professional approach in my negotiation at that time, they
Mhm.
didn't care, which is ultimately something that we have to learn to deal with in these skill sets that I promote again in my next book that's coming up in July, is that we have to be able to negotiate and speak for ourselves.
Hmm.
Okay. A gentleman told me a long time ago, I was 9 or 10 years old, and it's funny, I just shared this story earlier. He said, young man, and I'll spare you the whole story, but the punchline of it was, it's a sad dog that doesn't wag its own tail. And at 10 years old, I had no clue what that meant. Okay. It,
Yeah,
it took 20 years of life and experience to finally figure out what the heck this guy was talking about when he said, it's a sad dog that doesn't wag its own tail. And
yeah,
basically, what that means is that we need to promote ourselves and speak highly about ourselves. Be humble, maintain humility, and speak well about the things that you do,
yeah.
which in today's society, and I'll just put it out there and say in our dogmatic society,
Mm.
where religion rules, especially here in the States, it's not looked highly upon where a person speaks well of themselves because it's looked at as, you're being, well,
Uh,
what's that word? You're braggadocious, right? Something
Pompous,
like
yeah.
that. Pompous. Yeah, exactly. As opposed to saying, hey, I did very well here and I want to share this with other people, which is my approach.
Mm.
It can be taken in a different way.
Yeah,
So even in my negotiations where, hey, I literally laid out all the charts, the facts, the figures, the dollar amount, the revenue that I grew for the company, and it didn't make a difference. So though my articulation was there, I didn't have the best negotiation skills that was able to merit me that increase in pay, even though my work was worth it and the results show for themselves. There were some factors that were outside of my control. And to this day, ironically enough, every person that was outlined that was a part of that negotiation process, none of them work for the company anymore. Not one person,
right.
right? So that says a lot about how that particular company operated. To again sum it up, negotiation being a huge, huge, huge aspect of how we're going to operate as people going forward, as well as the emotional intelligence. Those are again just two of the 12 skills that I think are deeply needed in our society today.
Now, I want to touch upon one thing that you mentioned, right? There's two ways to look at how that negotiation failed or broke off, right? We have for a negotiation to either be successful or to fail. Uh, one of the parties has to back off, right? And I would say if the negotiation is not going in a direction which is favorable to you, you
Mhm.
should be having that emotional intelligence to rather not push forward and be egoistic. Yeah, this is the negotiation that I have to win, I have to win. It could be
Exactly.
something that could lead to a loss for you later, right? And to have that
Exactly.
emotional intelligence that you have and then build on it and take a step back and say, like, and to cut the cross out, right? So that kind
Hmm.
of thing. So, do you want to add to that?
Sure, sure. And I apologize. Was there a direct question surrounding it, just so I can make sure that I address the question properly?
So it's like the emotional intelligence being connected to the negotiation itself, right? When it's not working in your favor, or you see that the other party is not willing to negotiate itself, is not participating in the conversation. So you'd
Mhm.
rather take a back seat and then cut the conversation itself. Yeah, having the emotional intelligence. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because ultimately we still want to create win-win environments.
Yeah.
So a win-win environment basically says, hey, we're here to come up with something that works for each one of us inside of this framework. And sometimes it may not work. So negotiation says, I'm coming into this with the spirit of, I want everyone to win. I'm
Right.
not asking for $250,000 just because I know that you just cleared up $250,000 worth of space on your balance sheets. I'm asking for something reasonable so that I can feel good about doing my job and the ultimately the promises that you made are fulfilled as well. Again,
Yeah.
that's another story. But then at the same time, I'm still needing to work here. So
Yeah.
then emotional intelligence kicks in where, hey, I've got to read the room. Okay. I've got to read the room. And if there isn't an empathetic bone in the body of the person to whom I'm working on this negotiation with, then
Hmm.
I have to be able to see that and not get emotional and still maintain my composure, as
Yeah.
well as in this particular instance of that place that I was working, realized that my value wasn't necessarily seen to the
Mhm.
fullest that it could be at that time, and that I should personally look elsewhere. So we end as friends again from that negotiation. And I know that now this is how they feel. They know how I feel, and
Yeah.
they've got a choice, right? They can see to it that I'm feeling good about the work, or they can kind of kick the can down the road
Yeah.
is an expression that's used here. They chose to kick the can, so me having my own self-worth and my own value that I know is there, I said, well, internally, I have to say to myself, hey, this isn't where I'm meant to be, and I need to start looking elsewhere. And that's ultimately where what happened in
Yeah.
going to found my own company.
Now let's talk about how you're promoting this whole idea, right? We're talking on a over the internet on a digital platform for a podcast. We're recording an episode. Have you tried social media? What are the response that you're getting? Because you've got some great ideas coming down, right? You're talking about employer healthcare. You're talking about 12 skills that people should be having. How is it? How is the internet taking it?
Wow. That is, again, we probably need a few hours to touch on that, to go like platform by platform. But with the advent of the internet and the social media channels that are available to every single person,
Mhm.
honestly, Aditya, there's no reason that a person can't get their message out unless they're afraid, is the only thing that I'll say as far as that's concerned. Now, social media itself is what helped my first two books to hit bestseller within 2 weeks of
Oh,
the
okay.
launch for each one. It's because I do have a pretty good social media following.
Mhm.
I do have a presence on
Mhm.
social media. So if we can take one thing away from this to start, it's that presence makes a difference.
Mhm.
And what you're promoting with your presence makes a difference. For example, I know a lot of people that pop up on my feed that are uh, not always, but very consistently just using language that to me
Mhm.
isn't language that says professional.
Okay.
It's not language that says partnership.
Yeah.
It's not language that says, hey, I would like to work with you and have you partner with my organization, or I'd like to promote what you're doing. It's not that type of language. And it's not a good or a bad thing, right? It's not a moral judgment on the person and how they speak and how they choose to communicate. It's a matter of what's in you and how it comes out. So if certain vernacular is what a person tends to use, that's great. Now, they have to realize also that if they're going to be taken on a professional role in any way, shape, or form at any point in time in their lives, that the things that they talk about for the last 3, 5, 6, 10 years on social media, unless they're really good about deleting it all, which 99% of
Uh-huh.
us aren't, um, they're going to be there. So if a
Yeah.
person wants to deep dive and look and see what you support and how you speak and what's important to you, they can do so. And with AI, it makes it even easier to scan, right, the
Yeah.
years of a person's unlocked profile, whether it be LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. And now, because pictures are being actually, I'll call it, and I can't say this with 100% accuracy, so disclaimer, but pictures are being categorized with the advent of AI. So AI can
Mhm.
go back into years of photos and notice if there are, I'll just say, drugs and alcohol
Uh-huh.
present within it. And again, I'm guilty of having a beer or a glass that might look like there's a beverage in it on my social media profile. And again, over 21 at this point, I don't care. Right. But
Yeah.
what you've never seen on my profile is any sort of violence.
Yep.
You've never seen disrespect.
Hmm.
You've never seen out of control behavior
Hmm.
with any illicit substances. You won't see that stuff on my personal profile or my public professional profiles because that's not who I am. So
Correct.
again, just a fair warning to those out there that want to involve themselves in a professional setting, that social media is there as a tool
Hmm.
and it can be used against you if you've not necessarily cleaned up that image before going into the professional realm. And some people attempt to, you know, misspell their names or have some funny spelling about it. Well, the reality of it is, if a person wants to find out some things about you,
Yep.
they're going to find out those things about you,
Yes.
right? Big Brother is real. I've gotten a designation about 20 years ago as a certified identity theft risk management specialist. So you'll see my name on LinkedIn. I have CITRMS
Okay.
after it. Basically, a designation that says I know entirely too much about identity theft. So I won't bore you with that. But the reality of it is that that information that's out there is there in some way, shape, or form. And
Yeah.
unless you purposely go and remove it all, then
Hmm.
again, that's where social media can hinder you. So, best advice, keep a professional and clean appearance.
Hmm.
And for things that you want to promote, in your personal life that that are I'll say it like this, and not to bring religion into this, but if you wouldn't say or do those things in front of your religious leader, if you are religious, or in front of your grandma or grandpa, if you
Yeah.
have those good family ties,
Yeah.
you might not want to
I
put
want
it
to
up on
put
social
this.
media.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. No, this is something that I'm hearing from a professional for the first time. I've obviously had discussions with peers and colleagues that yeah, you should be keeping your social media clean. Somebody will come and judge you and things like that. It's the first time I'm hearing it from a professional, but uh, I've, there have been instances where people they've done something irrational on social media and they've been fired. Um, and I've also heard cases where people have not been hired because they said something in the past. Uh,
Mm.
how far can a company take it, or how far is it justified to take it back in time, or how far should a say you're trying to hire somebody, how far should you be looking back? It's a subjective question, right?
Yeah, that one. So I'll give a shout out to Johnny C. Taylor Jr., who is
Mm-hmm.
the CEO of SHRM, SHRM. It's the global standard, so to speak, when it comes to human resources. And I haven't looked to see what they've outlined as far as the usual and customary,
Mm-hmm.
as to look back in terms of a potential employee's lifestyle, if you will. The being a person that has been in a hiring and firing position, I will say that I personally would look at the last year to 3 years as a baseline,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the sensitivity of the position,
Right.
depending on the responsibilities that a person may have.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, look, I get it. We've all been teenagers. We've all been young adults. So anyone under the age of 25 that has gone to college and had that experience might have a few unique experiences that hopefully they didn't commemorate on social media for life. But if that's the case, and they were, let's say, under the age of 25, well, now they're 30 or 32, okay, that's not really who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think, unfortunately, the judgment of people comes into play,
Mm-hmm.
where depending on the generation you're part of, again, shout out to
Yeah.
Dr. Tim Elmore, who has a book called The New Kind of well, I don't want to misquote his book, but Dr. Tim Elmore, The New Kind of Diversity, I believe is the name of that book, where in a beautiful chart, he outlines the various what's important to each generation. And it's about
Yeah.
6 generations that he covers everything from the silent generation to the boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, which is broken up into Y and IY, to then Gen Z, and then, Gen Alpha, but that's not really, they're not in the workforce. But this being a time that there are, I believe, 4 to 5 generations that are
Mm-hmm. In the work.
able to work,
Yeah.
right? At this particular time, it makes a difference to have an and this is circling back to emotional intelligence, it makes a difference to understand where that generation is and has
Yeah.
been, and to make sure that you're not using an ethnocentric approach to judge that generation's activities and actions and beliefs based on your particular generational beliefs where you sit.
Right.
And an example of that may be a person in human resources that's in their 50s, right? That is a part of Generation X, I believe, and they're hiring a person in their 20s that may be a part of Generation Z. So if you're in your 50s and you're looking at the things that a person did that's in their 20s, the times were entirely different, right? From the 20s of the 50-year-old versus the 20s of the current 20-year-old. And also the value systems, the access to information, the technology, everything is drastically different over a 20 to 30-year span. So for a person in the human resource capacity to then judge a person in their 20s based on what's important to them and how they are now would be, again, a subjective suicide, if you will. And I know that word is kind of tough to say, so you might have to, bleep it out or whatever the case may be. But that can be suicide to a company
Mhm.
where because they don't see the value and understand the generational difference and what this person brings to the organization, they can then lose out on great talent, amazing talent that can further them farther than they thought that they were able to go by bringing on a person that's closer in age or more like me, so to speak, uh, in relation to that human resources or hiring professional. They'll lose out on opportunity
Mhm.
because of their subjective and subtle
Yeah.
bias, and discriminatory practices. Now, they won't call it discrimination. They don't necessarily
Yeah.
understand, and people in general don't understand those underlying biases that we
Yeah.
have. But that's a real thing and should definitely be taken a look at and taken seriously.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of information that you've just crammed in right now in the past 30 minutes. Thank you so much for joining in. It's just that, yeah, I will also take some time to process all the information that we just discussed. Yeah. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining in. Before we close, do you want to share some details as to where people can get in touch with you?
Sure
If
thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Listen, open up your Google browser and type in Paul H. Flowers Jr., right? Paul, Paul, H is the middle initial, Flowers, and then Junior Jr. And you can find me on every social media platform. LinkedIn is my preferred as I'm on there 3, 5, 12 times a day. My podcast is the Popa Replays podcast show, which is available on YouTube as well as every streaming platform, where I interview people that are entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs on the rise,
Mhm.
parents, and we talk about, again, just a little bit of everything, given the name of the show being the Potpourri Place, which is a play on my last name, Flowers, but potpourri being a mixture of dried flowers to create this beautiful scent. It's symbolic to me that we are all a mixture of things. We're not
Right.
just the business that we do. We're not just the parent. We're not just the spouse. We're not just the author. We are all of these things
Mhm.
all at once. And occasionally we have to wear these various hats and
Yes.
know when to turn it and all that. So paying ode to that, I named the show the Popa Replace podcast show because again, we're so much more than just what we do. I would love to again offer listeners the ability to connect with me there. They can listen to me, they can watch it on YouTube, wherever they prefer to stream their podcast. And also for those that are again in a decision-making capacity as employers, please check out the books. There are three currently. The third one just launched, that are a part of the Cost Layer series. It's a three-book series on Amazon. You can just search Paul H. Flowers Jr. there, or you can search for the first book. It'll bring up the other two, which again is the Hidden Healthcare Gold Mine. And the goal being to educate first, empower second, and ideally make a change in how we operate from a business standpoint here in the US and again globally as I continue to release more books that are more relevant to a global audience.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Your Lab Central. To the audience, again, simple request, if you like what we talked about, do leave a like. If you have a question you want to add or you felt you related to some part of it, do leave a comment and let us know. And don't forget to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for joining in.
You're very welcome. Bye for now.